Guest joining us this half hour of the program. I used to watch him on TV. It was appointment TV evenings for me for many, many years when I was living on the eastern shore of the Chesapeake Bay, and he has a long history as a TV weatherman. Not just there, but he was in Washington and Baltimore, and in fact, his Washington tour of duty, we'll call it, led him into perhaps one of the biggest stories of our time. He may not have seen it that way a quarter century ago, but it's brought us to this point. 7 minutes after 8 o'clock, we're at 54 on Magic Valley this morning on News Radio 1310 KLIX and newsradio1310.com. Dennis Ketterer has been a guest with us on the show previously. And Dennis, I know it's probably been at least a year. I think the last time you spoke with us, we were having a conversation about another big story of our time, and that was your experience with the VA Medical Center in Phoenix, Arizona. Had to be at least a year ago or so, right?
I left Phoenix in November of 2015.
Yeah, it's been a while since you've been on the program, and we had that discussion at the time, and after you got off air, in fact, I was still getting telephone calls for the following half hour about your story. Your current story, though, is one that definitely caught a few of us off guard. I want to, first of all, welcome you back to the program, but it caught us, a few of us off guard, those of us who know you. I was getting ready for bed a couple of nights ago, and all of a sudden I started getting these text messages coming in. And just about everybody that I knew from Maryland and Delaware were sending me links, stories from especially the conservative media about some testimony you gave to the Judiciary Committee, Senate Judiciary Committee, as they're considering Brett Kavanaugh. And, of course, that's likely going to a full vote now. Maybe you could tell people a little bit about that you had met one of the accusers, was it Julie Swetnick, back in the 1990s, and she dropped quite a bombshell at the time when you had a conversation with her.
Yeah, well, let me start by saying that what I did was horribly wrong to have even been there, and I really wish I had made 30 seconds of our first meeting. I wish I'd used better judgment for about 30 seconds, and I wouldn't be on this broadcast.
Right.
But in the process, and I don't want to get too salacious about it, but in the process of our talking about sexual preferences and that sort of thing, she brought up that she liked, it's always hard to find the word in broadcast, but she liked multiple men at one time, from time to time. And I had asked her, is this a fantasy or reality or what? And she said, well, she had done it beginning in high school and has enjoyed it from time to time since.
Now, this was in I'm sorry to interrupt. Go ahead.
No, go ahead, Bill.
This was in light of the fact that you had met her and you had a few dates with her, and she started describing what her interests were when it came to physical relationships. And as I understand,
I don't want to mischaracterize that word date.
Okay.
We never went out to anywhere. I met her after I got off the air, and I got off the air at 11:35. Then, you have to shut the computer down and get everything cleaned up for the next person coming in, and which mostly I had done. I could typically leave by quarter of midnight, but sometimes a little later. So I just went to her place, or what I'm presuming was her place, after I got off work, and we'd be together for an hour or two.
And there was no physical relationship between you two?
Well, no, actually. See, that's kind of the funny thing, and I'm glad you're asking this. I've been on some of the national cyber rags, and I call all of them cyber rags when they're on. The Post is a cyber rag when it's on cyber only. But I had there was a physical relationship. It just was non-intercourse relationship, but it was headed in that direction. That's why we were having those discussions.
And then that discussion made you think, I've got to get away from this.
Yeah, that was the last time I saw her, was when we had that discussion. And because To be fair, AIDS was a big thing at that time, and I was married and I had kids, and it kind of drove home the point that I shouldn't have been there to begin with. I'm at fault for that, not Julie. I mean, I know Julie approached me, but I could have said no. I could have said I'm sorry, but I can't. I can't have that relationship. But I didn't. I entered into it initially quite willingly.
Now, we should point out that, as I understand it, your marriage was pretty much headed toward an end at the time, and
we were certainly having trouble. And
right.
And the irony is what the trouble had started to become, and I don't want to get into that for my ex's sake. She's a good person,
right.
And wow, this is it's interesting, the questions that you're asking.
Well, I just want to make sure
we were having difficulty, and yeah, I was half wife shopping. I mean, a lot of my talk with her was interviewing for maybe my next wife, or but I had 4 kids who were still in their teens, and I had to worry about them too. And in fact, some weren't in their teens yet.
Well, I'm not trying to judge anything you did, because I went through a long, difficult breakup like that myself at almost the same period in time. So I understand that, you're kind of caught between, you're in that gray area. You're not quite sure what direction sometimes to go in life. And I just to establish that, just to get that out of the way, because that way people won't have to ask any more questions about it. But the fact of the matter is that conversation with Julie Swetnick kind of probably it was in the back of your mind for many, many years and wasn't really anything you thought about. And then all of a sudden she pops up in the last few weeks as a Brett Kavanaugh accuser. And that's where you decided maybe you had to come forward and do the right thing.
Actually, that's somewhat correct. When I found out, my day Wednesday last week was going so very, very well. I'd gotten a new client, and we're struggling anyway, and so that was a good thing. And my health was starting to pick up, and a lot of good things were happening. And I was listening to satellite radio, and it's either Fox or CNN, because those are the 2 news opinion channels that I listen to the most. And I heard about a third accuser, and so I sat there with my engine off, but my radio on still, listening, even though it was kind of warm without the air conditioner, to hear about it. And then they said it was the third accuser, his name was Julie Swetnick. So I got out of the car right away and went into the house to turn on the TV, and sure enough, that's who the third accuser was. I wasn't sure I heard the name right. And even on TV, I backed it up a second time on the DVR to double check that name. And I'm like, you got to be kidding me. And at that point, I found out what her allegations were. And by the way, because there's been some mispublication, I had no idea whether he spiked punch or not. My only concern went toward the group sex thing since high school. And she wasn't in high school, by the way, when she alleged this first incident happening. I didn't know that at the time, but I found out later. So it just adds some fact in there. And then she continued to go back to these parties, supposedly. So, if it was against your will, why would you go back? I mean, that to me would be a no-brainer. But it doesn't stop people from saying horrible things about me.
Of course, you're too.
So anyway,
well, go ahead.
Anyway, the bottom line is that I was approached by Julie, and I left with her, and we had physical contact. And if you go by, what was the prosecutor's name that interviewed Blasey Ford for the Republicans?
Mitchell, I believe.
Mitchell, yeah. Going by her definition of sexual contact, we had it, but we did not have intercourse. And Julie's attorney recently released a statement to Channel 2 here in Utah that Julie says that we didn't have a physical relationship at all, which wasn't true, but she was quite aggressive, and I liked it. I mean, it's one of the things I like about a woman. If she is sexually aggressive, it's a good thing. We probably would have had intercourse if I had allowed it, but I was still struggling with what I was doing. There were a lot of complex things going on at the time. I knew what I was doing wasn't right, and that would only have complicated it more, but it got to the point where, we had to make that decision, or I had to make that decision. That's how we ended up in the final conversation we had.
We got a couple of minutes before a break, and then we've got a few minutes after that. But at some point, though, you felt you had to reach out and touch base with Senator Hatch's office.
Oh, yeah, that happened on Wednesday after I knew her name. And then I tried to convince myself briefly that there must have been two Julie Swetnicks about the same age in that same area, because that way I wouldn't have any problems. So I went off to my podiatry appointment at the VA. I came back home. I talked to my wife about it. And because I'd since seen a picture to make sure that it was the same person, and it was. And I had to tell my wife of 3 years about an untrustworthy thing I had done. And she was surprisingly good to me. And she just wrapped her arms around my neck, because I told her I know I need to do the right thing, but I don't know if I can or even if I should. And she wrapped her arms around my neck, and she said, if you don't do the right thing, you'll never be able to live with yourself, and you know it. And so I got in touch with my former high priest group leader. Now he's in the elders quorum, because they combined the high priest and elders quorum into one thing. And he's an assistant. At first I reached out to my bishop, but he was on vacation. So then I met with John, and we talked about it, and I told him this is going to be hard because I just got my children's confidence back. I had been disfellowshipped for a couple of years for similar activity.
Well, Dennis, can you hold that thought for a couple of minutes, because we have to get to a short break. And
sure.
I'm coming up on 8:19, and Dennis Ketterer is our guest. Dennis is a former television meteorologist in many, many places around the country, who met Julie Swetnick in the 1990s, early to mid-1990s, and he's had quite a story to tell, and it has become part of one of the biggest stories in the country at the moment. But it also bolsters, I guess you could say, the argument for confirming Judge Kavanaugh to the Supreme Court. It's 52. We're 20 minutes after 8 o'clock. Bill Colley with you as well on Magic Valley This Morning on News Radio 1310, KLIX, and newsradio1310.com. Our guest is Dennis Ketterer. He's joining us from his home. We'll just say it's in the area, the Ogden Metropolitan Statistical Area, as it's referred to. 8:22, we're at 54 on Magic Valley This Morning on News Radio 1310, KLIX, and newsradio1310.com. Bill Colley with you until 10 a.m. I don't want to waste too much more of Dennis's time, but just to recap, Dennis had known Julie Swetnick in the 1990s, and she had revealed some things to him that sort of throw water on her claims about Brett Kavanaugh and these parties where she claimed gang rapes were going on when she was younger. And Dennis was just telling us that he took his story to his some folks in his church, and then, Dennis, I was going to say, it went from there. You went from there on to speaking to Senator Hatch's office.
Yeah, what happened was that my former bishop, who had connections to Hatch's office, reached out to them for me Wednesday night. And I didn't hear anything from them on Thursday, and I didn't figure I would because it was the subcommittee. I was kind of, watching and not watching, intermittent watching the committee meeting. And then on Friday, I spoke with Hatch's office. They immediately transferred me off to Hatch's D.C. office, and they immediately transferred me off to Grassley's office, which got me to the investigators for the Judiciary Committee majority side. And they really took me over the coals. I mean, it it felt like I had committed a crime, and they were interviewing me. They were cross-examining me, and they brought some things up that I had no knowledge of, and kept coming back to that as well. And because of where I live, we're right up against the mountains, so I figured, well, maybe it was the cell breaking up. But it happened so frequently, and there were four of them on the phone at the time, if I remember the number correctly. But they were asking the same thing in a different way, and then and I won't get into the questions because I think that they want that held in reserve. But they asked me two particular questions over and over again, and I'm starting to get irritated because my phone couldn't cut out that much. Well, I had my wife listening in on speaker the whole time, and I'm glad I did. My wife used to work for an attorney, and she told me all they were doing was trying to see if you were a credible witness. They were trying to trip you up to see if you were coming forth with real information, or if you were trying to make part of it up or whatever. And I'm like, okay, well, then I guess I'm not angry, but you would like to be trusted at face value, but apparently today you cannot.
Now,
So, and by the way, I get that not everyone likes that I have taken the path that I've taken. Only the Washington Post reached out to talk to me nationally. Well, that's not true. PJ Media contacted me. I didn't check my Facebook Wednesday night. I just wanted to go home and get away from it. And they reached out to contact me, and I never contacted them back. Never heard of them, for one thing, and for another thing, I didn't want to let this out until I knew it was going to go out. And then I did hear from CNN for their I guess their internet page, their web page, and I heard from ABC in Chicago. It wasn't for the newscast per se. I think it was also for their cyber rag. And then, but the Washington Post contacted me. It no sooner hit than I got a call from the Washington Post. It no sooner hit the Judiciary Committee's website than that, and I got a call from someone who overall did a very good job.
I was going to say there are people probably at the Post who still, with some institutional memory, would remember you from television.
Oh, the reporter who interviewed me, I'm not sure she's as old as my time back with Julie was, but she was fair. She mischaracterized one thing, and I think it was an accident. And I do want to clear this up. I did think when Julie first approached me, she might be a prostitute. She might be a high-end call girl, because I was 350 pounds, and Julie was frankly really a knockout. I mean, at 30 years old, she made that black dress look real good. And I'd been in Vegas and approached by high-end hookers before, and I knew how to say no. But Julie never once brought up a date. Do you want a date? There was no discussion of sex for money. There's none of that. And I was flattered that she was interested. So then when I went over to her place, I began to realize that it was only because I was on TV, and it was kind of an opportunistic thing for her. But Julie was not a call girl. And the other thing that I'm really disgusted with, frankly, is people say, well, you're participating in slut shaming. I never called her a slut. And the people who are so against slut shaming are the ones calling her a slut. And I resent that. She may have different sexual proclivities, but that doesn't require a label. It doesn't require saying things about her in that regard. And that really came up yesterday. And finally, on one of my Facebook friends' threads, that came up. And I just let them know, you're the ones calling her a slut, not me. And I resent that. And I do. Guys do some very similar things, and they're not sluts. Oh, yeah. Okay, fine. Well, then let's keep that balanced out.
Well, Dennis, I got to let you go, but I just want to tell you, your honesty is very refreshing. I'm glad to call you a friend. And I wish you well on this. I know it wasn't easy to do.
Thanks, Bill. No, it has not been easy. And who would have thought 23 years? I think the odds of this happening, I told my wife, are a billionth of a percent better than my leg growing back.
Yeah.
Just incredible.
You got a good sense of humor, too. Again, thank you. God bless you, and stay well.
Thank you, Bill.
Take care, sir. Dennis Ketterer joining us this morning on News Radio 1310 KLIX and newsradio1310.com. It's 8:30. We're at 55. Bill Colley here until 10 a.m. Do want to mention Pastors Roundtable is coming up just after 9 o'clock news today. Also, I believe I haven't looked out in the lobby yet, I believe we're going to be joined by Idaho State Police just after the break at 8:30.